Bienvenue à la séance.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to meeting number 33 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts of the House of Commons.
Standing orders, although I believe everyone, all members and witnesses are in the room today, so thank you very much for that. Conformément à l'article 108 3G du règlement, le comité.
Pursuant to Section 108.3 of the Standing Orders, the committee is undertaking consideration of the 2026 spring reports of the Auditor General of Canada, sent to the committee on March 23rd, Monday, March 23rd, 2026. Chair? Yes, Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Chair. So once again, I would like to request a clarification. I know that recently we examined the case of the scandal in Laval where they have to pay $1 million to the Canada Revenue Agency, and we would like the Minister of Revenue of Canada come and testify here before the committee. We made a request formally 3 weeks ago. I would like to know whether Minister Champagne has given any response and if he will appear before us. Thus far, we do not yet have a date for the Minister of Finance, but it's a good question for the question period. When he's there, we'll continue to make the request to have a date for him to appear here before summer. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Get going from the Office of the Auditor General. Karen Hogan, nice to see you back again, who's the Auditor General of Canada. Gabrielle Lombardi, nice to see you back as well. And Aaron Jelinek, nice to see you as well. From the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, Ted Gallivan, nice to see you, who is the Deputy Minister. Alexis Graham, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, Economic Programs, nice to see you. And Tara Lang, Director General, Admissibility. And I'm sure I'm going to figure out how to pronounce that in a second. And from the Canada Border Services Agency, Aaron McCrory, nice to see you as well. Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement. I believe there are two opening statements. Ms. Hogan, you can kick us off for about 5 minutes, please.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Je vous remercie de nous donner.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to testify here before the committee to discuss our report on reforms of the foreign student program, which was presented last March. I would like to recognize that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. In the framework of this study, we examined the implementation of the program reforms for foreign students by Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, and this reform aimed to manage the growth and strengthen the controls for integrity. Overall, we concluded that although the department reduced the number of new study permits delivered, it had not responded to the expectations in other key areas. In 2024, the department delivered a bit less than 150,000 new permits, which was lower than the forecasts that were more than 350,000. Some provinces, in particular those that have lower populations, were affected to a disproportionate degree. For example, it was expected that Newfoundland, Labrador, and Saskatchewan would both have an increase of 10% in the number of new study permits approved compared to the previous year. However, they both had a decrease of at least 59%.
Although the department introduced a new tool to verify acceptance letters and had processes to identify potential fraud and student non-compliance, it did not effectively investigate or follow up when risks were flagged. For example, in 2023 and 2024, designated learning institutions identified over 153,000 potential cases of non-compliance with study permits, but the department investigated only about 4,000 of them. Most cases could not be closed because students did not respond to the department's requests for more information. Further, the department's fraud detection activities identified 800 cases of fraud after permits were approved. No follow-up occurred on these cases. In most instances, individuals went on to apply for other immigration permits while in Canada. More than half of those applications have since been approved. Our audit also identified an opportunity for better collaboration with the Canada Border Services Agency. We found that the Immigration Department did not collaborate with the agency to identify whether students with expired permits had left Canada. Using the Immigration Department's available data, we worked with the Canada Border Services Agency and found that only about 40% of the 39,500 students required to leave in 2020-24 had in fact left the country. Ultimately, the department needs to act on the information it already has to address integrity concerns in the program, including collaborating with the Canada Border Services Agency. This is equally important once students are in Canada and applying for additional permits. Monsieur le Président, je termine ainsi ma déclaration.
Chair, this concludes my opening remarks, and we will be pleased to answer any questions from the committee members. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Opening statement for about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais pas
Thank
lire
you,
le
Chair.
texte
I'm not
pour
going to read
maximiser
out
le
the
temps aux
text to
questions-réponses.
make the best use of time for questions and answers. I'd just like to emphasize the fact that these changes of the program were instigated by the government in 2023, so it is proactive to provide greater controls in the program.
A number of areas of improvement, both in terms of the decrease in the number of students, which was the strategic objective. Secondly, the implementation of a letter of verification process with educational institutions. And finally, the cancellation of the student direct stream. That program no longer exists. Ce que je dirais, Monsieur le Président, c'est que nous avons un plan d'action.
As I was saying, Chair, we have a plan of action, and it's important for me that all plans of action be completed in 2026 and include action at the appropriate time. And secondly, we have undertaken to follow up on 100% of those files where there's a possibility of fraud. And furthermore, when there is indeed a gap or a nonconformity with the regulations, we take 100% responsibility for those cases. And finally, we have taken the responsibility to better manage the end of visas. When a visa expires, we undertake a responsibility to do a follow-up. Thank you, Chair. And I will be prepared with my team to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Suivant. Consist of 3 members, 6 minutes each. Mr. Redikoff, welcome. You will kick us off for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Auditor, thank you for that report. It was a great report. And in there, you had mentioned 51 cases of letter of acceptance fraud that you had looked into that were flagged, but the officers didn't follow procedures in 14 of those cases. Is it fair to say that IRCC systems can detect fraud but then not follow through and still let it pass?
I think we found many instances where the Immigration Department has information in their possession that they're not acting on, and their systems identified fraud or even flagged potential noncompliance with study permits. But it is that follow-through that is something that is lacking in many of the cases that we looked at.
Right. So in 12 of these flag cases, officers refused the applications for other reasons, but didn't actually resolve the fraud question. It was what you pointed out in the report. Mr. Gallivan, does that mean that your department failed to make a misrepresentation finding, failed to trigger a 5-year ban, and failed to alert the next officer who might review that specific file in another application scenario?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I'd say is the potential certainly exists. Without knowing the facts of the case, you can't say for sure, but I think the concern the OIG flagged is without doing the homework and without documenting the file, that could have been the case.
So, Ms. Hogan, that would be an unacceptable situation where that wasn't flagged, and that's what you pointed out in the report, correct?
Absolutely, because those steps were meant to ensure that something be done if the person was found to have not followed the rules, right? Putting a flag so that you consider that during the next immigration status, or placing a ban. There are lots of tools in the toolkit at the Immigration Department, but if you don't take it to the end of the investigation, you can't use one of those tools.
So the study permit is one stream where there were problems with fraud. Did you have a chance to look at other streams to check for fraud as well?
No, this audit was focused solely on the international student program. So we did look at the student direct stream that had some concerns because certain countries that were in that stream were flagged as high risk, as potentially using fraudulent documentation, yet they were in the student direct stream, which would, by its nature, was meant to fast track and be a bit of a light touch. But it would have all been linked to international student, whether it be in one instance or another, but it was to the international student program.
So you also investigated 800 cases where fraud was suspected, and actually IRCC chose to not investigate any of those. You mentioned that one. So as an auditor, would you be concerned that this pattern of not investigating fraud would be present in other immigration streams as well?
I mean, that's really hard to say. It would matter on whether the individuals who were carrying out the procedures here are the same individuals, what are the policies and procedures, what kind of oversight was exercised. I think it would be wrong for me to extrapolate that because in the international student we saw the fact that there was information not being acted on, that would be extrapolatable to the rest of the department.
Globe and Mail had a story recently that showed that IRCC instructed its frontline officers to allow asylum claimants in the country, even if they suspected the client was not being truthful. It was a story that was a couple weeks ago. Does this type of behavior concern you, given what you found in the student program?
I don't know the article that you're referring to, and I think this is where I would expect that rigor be applied where rigor is meant to be applied. We saw that the Immigration Department has risk units that do a really good job of analyzing risk by country and by region, but then we saw inconsistencies with those risk assessments or the follow-through on information. And the department should care about the rigor of the immigration process, not just at the intake of an application, but while an individual is in Canada, and then when they should comply with the permit and leave. And we found that they really do need to do a better job at managing those risks throughout the rest of the process, not just the application stream.
So, Mr. Galvin, your department response to this, for this particular issue, said that you would add alerts to the file where fraud has been discovered. So, will this capture concerns raised at the very front end, like in the example I just mentioned about that was found in the article? So if an agent doubts the original story, will that actually be noted in the file?
The short answer is yes. The indicator's there for a reason, and IRCC will, through specialized compliance units, enhanced training, more clear direction, ensure that those are populated. And then to the OAG's point, more importantly, make sure there's follow-up action on those indicators.
So you'll be revising the instructions given to the frontline officers to reflect that then?
Yes.
Okay. Given that IRCC later removed the express entry job offer points specifically to reduce illegal buying and selling of LMIAs, are you concerned, Auditor, that the same pattern you found in the student stream, which was risks identified but weak follow-through, may also exist in work permit and permanent resident streams?
Again, difficult for me to extrapolate, but what I can tell you is we saw that extensions of study permits or applications for other types of permits were done with, and I'll call it a light touch, because there was an assumption of rigor the first time through, and what we saw was that wasn't always the case. So there is a concern there that now that risks have been identified, that the Immigration Department looks at how they treat individuals who perhaps made it through under false pretenses or with fraudulent documentation, to make sure that you don't apply the typical light touch on an extension, that you add rigor when rigor is needed. We have flagged all these cases to them, and I think it's up to them to handle the cases we've identified, but then to also to see if there's others within the student stream or other
Mr. Gallivan, have you found evidence of fraud in your first few weeks as a deputy minister?
There certainly was a practice of people falsely claiming to be students only to claim asylum. That's the kind of fraud that affected the student direct stream, and that's one of the key drivers to discontinue it. I think the concern now is what do we do with the people who came in while the program was in place, and the commitment we've taken is to follow through on all of those cases.
Thank you. That is your time. Now over to Mr. McKinnon. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. We certainly welcome the Auditor General's report. Thank you. It's very favorable. It certainly indicates that the intent of the program has been largely met. And certainly strengthening the integrity of the system is a top priority. One of the things I believe I heard from Mr. Gallivan's testimony is a difference in opinion relating to the amount of fraud cases that have been investigated. I'm wondering if there's a difference between how the Auditor General categorizes these as well as and whether IRGC categorizes them differently. So if you'd each like to respond to that, I'd appreciate it.
I don't think there's a difference of opinion. The Auditor General is correct. For example, the top line number of 150,000 is correct as potential fraud. IRCC at the time hadn't done the homework to distill that to the amounts of actual fraud. And so the Auditor General was 100% correct. There's a potential of 153,000 cases. We've subsequently done the homework and brought the number down significantly. We now believe that 22% of those cases are the potential fraud cases. We have more work to do to determine who within that reduced population have actually left the country, and that's something that we need to do more systematically going forward. But from my perspective, there's no daylight between the OEG's findings and ours. Had we documented and done the work that we've now done at the time, she would have had a different number, I believe.
So I'll agree with the Deputy Minister. I don't believe there's a difference of opinion in what we're saying. There are two buckets that we're talking about around this table, the 153,000 students who were flagged as potentially not complying with the requirements of their permit. There was only 4,000 investigated, so we didn't look into the 150 some odd other thousand. Out of those 4,000, more than about half were closed without to the work that the department's done since our audit. The 800 cases of fraud were identified by the department themselves. Our concern is they did not consider any action on those 800 files when action should have been taken. And we highlighted in our report where all of those files are now. The majority have applied for other immigration status, and about half have already received it. And it's that kind of thing that I hope the controls, better controls, will help prevent or make sure that those individuals really should have received another status. So there is no disagreement between the Deputy Minister and I on fraud at all.
So it sounds like the investigation of potential fraud has been very, very adequately and satisfactorily addressed. Do you believe?
From my perspective, once we implement the action plans that we have with the OEG and before this committee, Mr. Chair, I think they will be, but right now we're not there yet. And so there were a number of improvements. I think if you take a step back, there was a 4-year plan. Bring the numbers under control, increase controls, the student direct program being abused for asylum seeking, like those top line things were done and have happened. The OEG came in 2025 and saw that we weren't done that 4-year voyage. And so I think a number of actions that IRCC has underway and that we've committed to by the end of this calendar year will be necessary before your statement would be true.
If I could add, Mr. Chair, what I would add is there were hundreds of thousands of students that came through the student direct stream. And I would expect that the department will now look at the rigor they apply to any of those students when they apply for any other immigration status, because the rigor wasn't there in the first place. So you have the chance now to put a control at the second application.
Well, that brings it to a more general question, Mr. Galvan. What is your department's response to the feedback shared by the Auditor General, and what steps will your department be taking going forward to address these concerns?
I think the most important message is all indicators need to be followed through. And so these very large numbers that we're talking about, 150,000 others, Mr. Chair, I think the Auditor General Canadians would just expect to see that IRCC goes through those files and comes to a determination. It's not good enough to say most of them have an innocent explanation. We have to do the homework. And so we've already started to set up teams. We have issued procedures. In fact, those field directions asked for are committed to by September 2026 in our management action plan to kind of begin to do that. And once we do it, we do get to a smaller number of people who applied for a visa under false pretexts. Then we need to follow through. We need to follow through in terms of a flag in the system. We need to follow through in terms of any renewal. With your colleagues earlier this week, we talked about the 5-year ban. But if somebody makes a if somebody doesn't leave the country when they ought to, they could be subject to a 5-year prohibition from reentry. And so we need to manage the immigration system with greater control so that the legitimate travelers and legitimate students, which the vast majority are, can come to this country and study and that those who are trying to abuse the system suffer consequences and are disincentivized from doing it in the first place.
I guess I've got a few seconds left. I'm kind of interested in the numbers. So the numbers have substantially fallen in terms of approvals, but I understand the applications have substantially followed as well, and fallen as well. And I understand that the educational institutions have not been recruiting as vigorously. Is there any comment on that? Any explanation for that?
There certainly has been a chill, so the perception might have been greater than the reality. There is an issue, when we have time we can come back to, around the provincial allocation and unused spots. So right now there are unused spots in terms of the seats allocated to the province. But I would say internationally there was a message that Canada was being a little bit more rigorous, and I think it's a question of recalibrating that, because Canada benefits from high-impact, legitimate students. They're an asset to the country, and so we have to make sure that those students do continue to apply and come to Canada.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est M. Lemire, s'il vous plaît, pour 6
Next
minutes.
will be Mr. Lemire. You have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Thank you once again to the Auditor General for your work and for clarifying this issue for us. Mr. Gallivan, there's an aspect to consider which is perhaps even a greater problem. The Auditor General wrote that the department doesn't know whether the students were leaving Canada after expiry of their permits. So the Auditor General worked with your colleagues from the Canada Border Services Agency to draw up a list. And here we focus on one program, that of students, but it could be the case in many other programs. Do you have the numbers for all programs? And do you know how many people whose permit has expired who left Canada? And you have the numbers right now, and can you table them before the committee? No, we do not have exact numbers, and that's a problem. We have samples, we have projects, we have a broader picture, but we do not systematically manage the departure of visa holders. So for us, it's both the student programs, that's our first phase, in which we're going to put together or build something in the system and procedures. We're going to create a management framework to properly manage departures, and we intend to apply this for other visa programs as well. It's not all 80, but our team confirms that in May this year, we will, for the first time, have an indicator of presence in Canada. So I'm giving this as an example because we haven't really thought about it previously in the department to manage departures, but we are making a commitment to do so. So, according to the figures by the Auditor General, there are 23,500 people missing, and we don't know where the students are, whether they've left the country, but we ought to get some news in the near future on that. It would be interesting, perhaps, Chair, to be able to have another meeting to follow up on that. And then, in that regard, in connection with the question raised by my colleague MP McKinnon, we're talking about approval rates decreasing, what could be related to a decrease in the requests from universities. There may be a connection with more stricter measures in those applications, or are there certain relations with some countries which have simply become cooler and there are fewer applications from certain countries if we look at the statistics? I'll turn to my colleague for a more technical answer in a moment, but it's true that there are financial requirements there, and also we have cancelled the direct student stream, and there's also the climate. I don't know if you want to add anything. Yes, I could. I'm going to speak English if that's all right with you.
Excuse. Je vais dire que probablement oui, il y a exactement cette.
Yes, I would like to say that there has been a cooling.
I think it's important to sort of note that approval rates are primarily a function of recruitment practices of provinces and designated learning institutions. So IRCC can't approve an application that doesn't meet the requirements of the program. And those requirements did change, as we've all recognized. So there has been sort of this transition period from a more facilitative approach to a more controlled and disciplined way of managing the program based on allocations and lower numbers. And I think that has just created some need for these institutions to kind of look at student recruitment differently. And so we are kind of seeing those approval numbers being a little bit less, but we do anticipate this to rebound in the future as well.
Ben, en fait, les chiffres de la vérificatrice générale.
Well, actually, the numbers, we have the students coming from India through the direct student stream that came in 2018 and ended in 2024. I see a direct tie with the decrease in applications. Also, the Auditor General indicated that you noted risks to integrity in 2022 and that no concrete action was necessarily taken following that. And today, students are still on the territory. Those people will renew their study permits or request or apply for permanent residency. What measures have you brought in to rectify this situation, particularly now 94 to 95% of applications are being accepted, even if, according to the Auditor General's data, 12% of the demands have ineligible indicators. In many of those cases of ineligibility, it comes from the direct stream. I believe that the plan of attack is to consider those who entered during the direct student program with higher risks. So, as mentioned by the OAG, if those matters of renewal, if there's a procedure, and we made a commitment to create a procedure, a more strict procedure to deal with the lack of scrutiny in the first level and make sure that it's properly verified and treated as a certain population in which we have different risk assessment than from the population that followed the normal process. In addition, 541 fraudulent applications received either permanent residency or an extension of their study permit when they applied for asylum. How is it that even having committed fraud, those people obtained what they applied for? Is there a problem there that we ought to give priority to attacking? Perhaps I could start with I'll turn to my colleague in a moment, but I think we're touching on the jurisdiction of my colleagues, Manon and the Immigration and Refugee Board. I don't want to step on the toes of my colleague, but making decisions involves a number of indicators, and our role when somebody is subject to a decision from citizenship for permanent residency, we have a role to represent that, but there is a certain independent entity that takes all the factors into consideration and makes the decisions that they think are appropriate. I don't know if you'd like to add something.
Mr. Chair, when we're considering cases and when they're referred to the IRB, there are a number of reasons why we might want to intervene. Misrepresentation might be one of them, criminality, but officers have that discretion. So somebody who overstayed a visa one time, it's hard to say if that officer might decide that on the scale or balance of probabilities that this might be worth an intervention to the IRB to kind of interfere in an asylum claim.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
5 members various times. Monsieur Detel, vous allez commencer. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Detel, 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our committee and to the Canadian Parliament. I would like to start the question period briefly regarding what we're talking about. We're not talking about paperwork or piles of just anything. We're talking about human lives. When we talk about immigration, they're men and women who dream of living here in Canada. And I have to admit that with a certain dignity, there's a conflict of interest. My parents arrived on August 22nd, 1958, and they got off the boat at the dock in Quebec City. And when we talk about 150,000 potential frauds, it's a huge number, and it's quite a headline, and we can imagine how people might react. And above all, these are people who, in most cases, acted in good faith and chose to come here, and they expect the country that welcomes them will be able to live up to its exceptional reputation that our country has around the world. So my question, Ms. Hogan, when you discovered that 150,000 people who, as soon as you published your report, that they were going to become suspicious, that they would become targets, how did you respond to that? And do you consider that Canada did a good job in welcoming those people who, I am sure, would never have come here with the idea of doing fraud? And I don't think they were we have to live up to the responsibility and reputation of our country. I would like to acknowledge that most of the students who come here through the program are true students. They're really here to study, to grow, to decide if they want to remain in Canada or return to their country of origin. In the case of the 153,000 people, these are cases in which the institution in question, the educational institution, identified that perhaps the person is not studying full-time, or so perhaps the person is not fulfilling the criteria and requirements of their permit. They are lucky. They ought to give them a chance to show that they are studying. But not if they don't communicate with them, it's not acceptable. But if I come down to the 800 cases where the documents were fraudulent or where the person made imprecise representations, I think that has to be taken into account. And it shows the integrity of the individuals involved. So each case is different. From your viewpoint, is there a network of people who are organized to defraud the system? Or are they cases which just accidentally come up without any connection between them? It's not easy to answer that. In the case of the 800 cases in which the documents were fraudulent, it was very clear that there were some 700 of them that indicated an institution that does not exist. So it's clear that there is an aspect that has to be investigated more rigorously, and the department ought to take those steps in those 800 cases. Do you have anything to say about this, sir? Mr. Gallivan? Yes, from the same viewpoint. That's why I talked about getting into contact with them. Earlier this week, I talked about education, first of all, explaining the rules of the game right from the start. When we talk about the end of a visa, or expiry of a visa, it's to remind people about what the rules are. So I think that the approach of our agency is to truly aim towards education, advocate clear communication, sure, with a certain threat. And I turn to my colleague at the end for a small number of cases. But you asked a direct question, are there networks? A small percentage, yes. There's organized crime, which will encourage members to work their way through 5, 10, 15 per year. It's not the majority. Mr. Macquarie, you work for the Border Services, right? So I look at this from a distance and I say, okay, of course you have the educational institutions or universities, and then you have immigration, citizenship and immigration, and then you have the Border Services. Is it possible that they're working in silos? Thank you, Chair, for the question.
In the immigration system, along with the Immigration Refugee Board. And in fact, in my experience, we actually work very closely together with IRCC, for example. And so
the results are not there. Even if you work together very well, the result is not there.
I'd give you the example of about 2023, when we'd identified an individual who had been providing students with fraudulent letters, and we worked with the IRCC to work through the students that were affected by that, some of whom were genuine students and that we allowed them to stay in the country, and others who weren't, that we removed from the country. And that was a very collaborative effort between IRCC and the CBSA.
Et voilà. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Deltel. Up next, we have Mr. Osborne,
Thank you,
please.
Mr. Deltel.
And you're passing it on to Mr.
Mr.
Dan
Danko.
Coe. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
I will go third.
All right, very good then. So, Mr. Danko, just so you know, you have 5 minutes, and if you get your last question in within that 5 minutes, I do allow the witnesses to respond over your time. But if you interrupt them, your time ends. Their time ends. So, you've got 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Represent a riding with 3 post-secondary institutions, McMaster University, Mohawk College, and Redeemer University. So this is an issue that is very top of mind locally. And Mr. Deltel, I think, started on an important point that a lot of the international students that we're bringing in my opinion, were very much exploited. And they end up here thinking that they're going to get this great Canadian education, this pathway to citizenship, and a job and a life in Canada. And they end up in very substandard housing, in crowded conditions. They end up in a strip mall, in a poor education system, and just not being not receiving what they were promised. And this is my experience is largely in Ontario, where the provincial government basically created this system, this scheme, where the post-secondary institutions were almost forced to rely on international students as a source of revenue. And, you know, the extreme example of that is Conestoga College, which at one point had 30,000 international students each year in their system, which is the student population of McMaster, which is, you know, this historic, you know, very well-known internationally recognized university. Just a ridiculous level of abuse. And as part of that, the province created the system, but then some of those unscrupulous, I'll call them, institutions were recruiting overseas, making these promises, bringing people in, not delivering. So my question, through you, Chair, to perhaps the Auditor General, is did we consider what role the provincial governments and also the institutions themselves had in the abuse of these programs?
So I can't look at the role that the provincial governments or the learning institutions played, but I would point the member, Mr. Chair, to Exhibit 5 in our report, where we break down how the federal government interacts with the learning institutions. And the learning institutions are allocated a certain number of spots, and then or in each of the provinces, and the province decides which learning institution gets those spots, and then they can accept or not accept an individual or make an offer for them to come to school. But then that person needs to apply to the immigration department, and so they need to pass through two things: being admissible for immigration, but then also meeting the criteria of the program. So there is a lot of interdependency, and that's why I do believe that a better collaboration with the learning institutions and the provinces and the immigration department is needed to see why the intent was a lot sharper. Like the results of these reforms were a lot sharper than intended. Some provinces were meant to see an increase and saw large decreases. And so there might be some adjustment that's needed, but it's clear that there's a relationship between what the provinces do with the spaces that they are allocated and then who a learning institution makes an offer to, and then how that person passes through immigration and then program admissibility. So I hope I've captured that well, but that to me is, it can't be done without collaborating.
Thank you. And I'll extend that question to the Department of Citizenship and Immigration as well. Just another example from Ontario, and you know, that's my experience, so that's what I'm familiar with. But the system of colleges licensing their diplomas to third parties who are then basically packing strip malls full of international students, and they would graduate with, you know, an actual Ontario college diploma, even though the college was simply licensing that. So could the department comment further, please?
2 points. The first, the increased rigor in the financial requirements and the increased threshold will help mitigate and protect vulnerable students from being exploited in the manner you described. And then second, the SIM committee themselves produced a report with a much broader scope than the OEG's review. There are 10 findings. And then kind of an additional liberal finding, an additional conservative finding. J'ai pas noté de la bloc, mais c'est un bon rapport qui, je pense...
But it's a good report, which I think deals with the issues mentioned by the members, Chair, and we are taking due note of that report with the intention of having a government response within the timelines.
Thank you. Final question, then, and I understand we might be talking about this a little bit more, but on the timelines for security screening. So now that we've limited the number of international students, the final kind of frustration that I'm hearing from the post-secondary institutions is timelines for security screenings that don't necessarily line up with their admissions requirements. Could you comment on that, please?
Maybe I'll start from an IRCC perspective. we kind of triage and hand off to security partners. And so we are taking a look to make sure we're really managing risk properly. We have some categories where there's 100% referrals, and then we have these kind of roadmaps and journeys and criteria that we give to our officers to get referrals. And so one place we're starting is to make sure that those are effective and kind of using a feedback loop from the decisions to make sure that we're not needlessly tying up the intelligence community on cases that really ought not to be referred to them. But on the other hand, where there is a national security threat and a threat to the health and safety of Canadians, those cases are referred. And so that is one part of the kind of pipeline. And then I would kind of turn to my colleague, Mr. McCrory, for the next part of in the processing chain.
Yeah, so we co-manage the program with IRCC and CSIS, and I'd say one of the things we've struggled with is how do we balance efficiency and effectiveness, and we do want to make sure that we can make timely decisions. Some take too long, but we also need to be effective in terms of ensuring national security. Part of the challenge that we faced is as I said, some decisions take too long, but the other challenge that we've quite frankly faced is the volumes. And we've gone from about 50,000 people in our inventory in around 22, 23 to about 183,000 in our inventory. At the same time, our decision-making has gone up. We did 106,000 decisions last year, but we haven't kept up with the volumes coming in. So we are looking at how can we become more effective in terms of working through them. Because for a simple stage one applications, we can do that in less than 2 days, up to a maximum of 2 days. Other complex one can take 14 days or more, but we need to get our hands on them, and that means getting the inventory down. So we've got two large pools. One is visa applicants, and those come to us based on referrals from IRCC. But we also do 100% of in-Canada asylum seekers, and what we're actually moving to is a more risk-based approach. Similar to what we do with visa applicants, we're looking at how can we use indicators and do based on country profiles, based on our assessment of risk, working with CSIS, how can we more rapidly say, this file doesn't need the full-blown review, and we'll move it on and come to a decision quicker. By making those decisions quicker, we can then turn our attention to those files that require more work. And so we're optimistic that we can put a significant dent in our asylum numbers in this fiscal year that will allow us then to put more energy into all the files that we have before us. In terms of students themselves, last year, again, we had about 180,000 in our inventory. We actually had about 1,800 students come to us. We had 1,800 files referred to us as students, and we made 1,200 decisions over that same period. So not where we want to be, but we recognize that we need to do more in that space.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Michel Lemire pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Gallivan.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Gallivan, according to them, there's 153,000 students not respecting the criteria of their study permits. What are the consequences for those people? Because clearly you have financing only to investigate about 2,000 cases a year. So to my mind, what's not acceptable is the non-response of those people who are simply ghosting you, as they say, and by not responding, then no consequences follow. So why wouldn't their permits be suspended on the spot? Is there a procedure when a student or worker no longer has a valid study or work permit? What happens to that person? But in the meantime, can we say you haven't responded or fulfilled the criteria? Your permit is no longer valid. Does that exist? The way you describe it, it does not exist as of now. And actually, that's why we submitted a plan of action to properly document things and make commitments to implement it. As regards the 153,000 cases, there again, once we examined it, which was not done when the OAG visited, we found that they had changed educational institutions, which is not fraud. It's simply a paperwork situation that's rectified, or they changed their status, or they obtained a work permit or a work visa. So that's not a problem. But there is a significant number in which there is a problem. So we didn't know how many cases to investigate, so the department decided on a budget for 2,000. I think, and we make the commitment to investigate all cases in which there is not a reasonable explanation, but really, in fact, a person who stays in the country when they ought not to, who is not studying or not working, and so on. We are undertaking to find the person and contact them, and you're quite right. Someone who does not respond ought to have 3 times as much effort and have their file before the file is closed. That's the spirit of the plan of action that we've submitted to the committee. Thank you. I like the frankness of your answer and your willingness to answer the concerns raised by the Auditor General. Mr. Macquarie, I have a question in connection with a case that is direct that we experience in Abitibi-Temiskaming. If a student committed a crime and lost the right to be in Canada, what steps would be gone through to have that person leave the country, and how much time would it take before the person gets out of prison and leaves the country? Thank you for the question.
It's a hypothetical case, and as a general rule, we allow the criminal justice system to take precedence over the immigration system. So depending on the nature of the crime, if there may be serious criminal consequences to that, we'll allow the criminal justice system to take place, and then we'll be ready at the end of that to begin removal processes. In some instances, we'll work with local law enforcement, again, depending on the nature of the crime, and we'll say, well, we can do removal quicker than you can do work through the criminal justice system. And if you think of extortion, for example, the cases that we've seen in British Columbia, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Toronto area, we've actually been using our immigration tools to take individuals who've been involved in extortion and remove them from the country, and we've removed them fairly quickly. It's hard to say, though, in terms of the average time, because a lot depends, again, on the circumstances. Are they going to apply for a pre-removal risk assessment? Will they ask for a delay for health reasons? Will they appeal our decisions to the courts? Do they have a travel document? Is there an administrative deferral for removal in terms of where we take them to? So there's no hard and fast rule, but I would say that we have a legal obligation to remove people as quickly as possible, and we are. We did about 23,000 removals last year, and we prioritize those that are involved in criminality, or what we call serious inadmissibilities. Our second tier are those that are failed refugee claimants, and then third tier is everybody else.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Up next, Mr. Carrick, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you for everybody, all the witnesses, for coming here today. So I'd like to start by asking the new Deputy Minister that it's brought to my attention that you just started 4 weeks ago, correct? Great, thank you. I'll take your nodding as a yes, but yes, thank you. So in the IRCC, there was a testimony on Monday, and there was a lot of, I don't want to say excuses, but funding and budget those words were used repeatedly. So my thoughts and questions today will come from the public accounts aspect and protecting taxpayer money or acting for the taxpayer, because there's some numbers here that I'd like to share with the committee and the witnesses. So the funding for the IRCC has gone from $316 billion to $6.5 billion in about 5 years. That also includes a doubling of the labor force from 2015 to 2023, from about 6,300 to 14,000. Those are big numbers. So the budget for the IRCC is massive. And we started to do this investigating, and this came after some testimony from the Auditor General that I found great for their what they told us about, but concerning. The Auditor General department, so their funding is about $127.5 million a year. They were able to find and help with finding the 39,500 individuals that kind of were they're not supposed to be here, and their office did that with the help of all the other offices, and they kind of did it upon themselves to find those numbers. What's concerning is their budget is very small, the IRCC is very big. Now, obviously, the IRCC does a lot more than just that, so I'm not, going to dwell on that too much. But that's the point why I wanted to start on the dollars and figure out the dollars. But that also being said, there's a few other things that have come out today. My colleague from Hamilton raised some great concerns, some valid questions. The member from the Bloc Québécois also raised some interesting questions. We also heard from the Vice President of the CBSA, and one of the things there I want to touch on was fraud, which led to the question of screening and communication between agencies. And the gentleman had said that they are figuring out how to balance efficiency and time and dealing with bigger volumes and looking at how to manage that. These are all valid questions. So as me as a member of this Public Accounts Committee, I would like to, at this time, actually move a motion, if that's okay.
You have the right to certainly state your motion. I'll have to decide if it's in order, Mr. Carrick, but
Sure. So I can read my motion here.
Yep. May I just ask if you've submitted it with the clerk? Do you
Yes,
know?
I have.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it in both official languages?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. I'm gonna, if it's all right with you, I'm gonna have the clerk distribute it, if that's okay with the.
Sure,
is that,
of course.
Yeah, that way we can keep on track here. So yes, go ahead, Mr. Carrick. You may read your motion and we'll have a quick ruling.
So I'm moving this motion in just because I think we need to look a little
Tell you what,
deeper.
Mr. Carrick, just
Not a
give
problem.
us the motion.
Not a
so.
problem. In light of the findings in the 2026 report of the Auditor General of Canada entitled International Student Program Reforms, and given the additional concerns identified regarding oversight, enforcement, and the integrity within the international student visa system, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts write to the Auditor General to request that she expand the scope of her International Student Program Reforms Performance Audit to include A, the process and effectiveness of coordination between IRCC and the Canada Border Service Agency in tracking international students with expired visas, including data collection, information sharing, assessment for removal, and actual removals from Canada. B, the extent of non-compliance by designated learning institutions, including failure to report on student compliance, the identification of repeat offenders, and the application and effectiveness of law enforcement measures. C, the adequacy of procedures for verifying financial documentation submitted by applicants, including the detection, flagging, and the subsequent use of fraud indicators across immigration applications. D, the extent to which processing officers fail to act on or record indicators of potential fraud identified by learning institutions and the implications for reapplication and enforcement measures. E, the effectiveness and the integrity of risk assessment processes across all international student application streams, including the identification and mitigation of risk prior to and following permit approval. F, the handling of confirmed fraudulent cases identified by risk assessment units, including the absence of file flagging, enforcement actions taken or not taken, and the approval of subsequent immigration applications. G, the approval practices for study permits extensions, including the use of a light touch approach and the extent to which prior risk indicators or concerns are reassessed. And H, the scale of non-compliance among international students, including the adequacy of departmental resources for investigations, the thoroughness of those investigations, and the effectiveness of follow-up actions. And that the committee further write to the Auditor General to undertake an additional audit into an overall holistic security screening process across all program streams and how IRCC, Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship in Canada, the CBSA and the Immigration Refugee Board share information, interact with each other, and follow up on all cases of misrepresentation, fraud, serious criminality, terrorism, illegal border crossings, and all other reasons to deny permit approval from application and port of entry to final approval of permanent residency status or citizenship, including possible claims of asylum, expired permits, removal orders, detentions, pre-risk removal assessments, judicial proceedings, and all other steps inherent in the processes, and that the committee report this request to the House.
Thank you. Just hold for 1 second, Ms. Jim. So the motion's been distributed. It is a matter at hand issue. It is in order. Ms. Yip, I'm going to go back to Mr. Cure because I did cut him off when his intro. He does have that right, but I wanted to keep him in his time. I didn't actually know it would be quite that long, so I'm glad I did that. And then I'll come to you right after Miss Yip. So, Mr. Cure, you have a brief statement to go along it. If you don't, that's fine. We can move things right along. But back to you, and then I'll recognize Miss Yip.
I move this motion in the spirit of true nonpartisanship that this committee actually represents. I do believe that there's been many questions that we've heard across the board and valid concerns from everyone around this table. So I believe this motion and the further reporting that I request, or that this motion requests, is going to be very, very important information for the Deputy Minister, who is brand new, and to help him do his job better and help us help him. So that's my intent. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I recognize Ms. Yip, I will just let everyone know that what I do in these situations, I'm just going to take the temperature of the committee members. I'm going to see if there's something that we will resolve quickly or relatively quickly, or if it's going to go on for a while, and at which point I'll make a decision about what to do with our witnesses. So, Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
I'd like to suspend. This is a lot of information in your motion, and I'd just like to discuss.
So I'm open to doing that in a second. I'd like to do it one round though. So I saw Mr. Lemille, and I'll come back to Mr. Osborne, and then who I think had his yes, and then I will look to suspend Ms. Yip for a couple minutes at least for a discussion. But let's just do kind of a quick round here first. Mr. Lemille, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je pense que
Thank you, Chair. I think the Parliament needs more net correct to present motions in an approach of collaboration to get to the heart of the matter and give additional powers to the studies that we're doing. So in that sense, the Bloc Québécois will support the motion.
Mr. Osborne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I always sort of take the approach that you act in haste, you repent at leisure. I think, this is a rather lengthy motion. I agree with my colleague, not just to suspend, but to give us some time to analyse this motion. The other thing that I would ask and request, we have witnesses here. Are we able to continue with the witnesses and deal with this after we're done with the witnesses?
Those are all good questions. I don't have on my own the authorities to kind of suspend a motion. It's now before the committee. What I'll do, I will suspend for 3 to 5 minutes, and I'll actually join the discussion on this about the witnesses. But the opposition member does have the right to proceed with this should he choose to do that. So I'll just state that up front. He'd have to yield that to the committee. So I will suspend for I'll suspend 5 minutes. So the witnesses, if you want to get up, stretch your legs, I would ask you to come back though in 5 minutes, and we'll have a little discussion and see where we're going to go. This meeting is suspended. That was a little longer than 5 minutes. Apologize about that, but there was some helpful discussions. I guess, Mr. Osborne, I'll just note that the member is going to proceed with his motion. What this means to the witnesses, I'm sensing some broad possible goodwill here. Since we're still well within the 2 hours, I'm going to ask the witnesses just to hang tight, and we'll see how it goes here. And if we can resolve this in the next little bit, we'll come back to you, because I know many members would like to get through their questions. Some have not had that chance to do so yet, and that would be easier than having you come back at a later date. So, there's really no speaking list, and I assume we don't want to go right to a vote. Is there anyone that would like to speak to the motion, make any amendments? Yes, Mr. McKinnon.
I think this is a very interesting motion. I think it's something that I could get behind, but I have some issues. One of the concerns I have, of course, is concern about the independence of the Auditor General, and we cannot be seen to be directing her to do anything. I have no problem with making a request to her to take action. So I would make a suggestion. So I would actually move to amend this motion in the paragraph that says, and that the committee further write to the Auditor General to undertake. I think it would be clearer if we just change that undertake to be request. And secondly, at the end it says, and the committee report this request to the House. I would move to as well to drop that line.
I'm going to break those in two. I'm going to give you the floor. We're going to deal with that. So, I think the first one, I'm going to make a friendly amendment to yours. Could we just make it the Standing Committee on Public Accounts request? I don't need to write. The auditor's right here. The auditor's team watches everything this committee does, and we will, of course, send the motion over. So you'll clear out my inbox a little bit if we just both in the first paragraph have the Standing Committee on Public Accounts request that the Auditor General expand the scope, and then in that paragraph you mentioned that the committee request the Auditor General. I've just got to work on this. Just 1 second. Hold on. And that in the last that second paragraph, and the committee further requests the Auditor General undertakes an additional audit.
I have a problem with undertake.
Okay. Then let's work. That the committee
request helps
further requests an additional audit. Okay. Yeah. So,
I will accept.
is that agreement? Okay, good. Mr. Osborne, do you want to speak to that, or could I just get agreement on that, and then we can move to Mr. Mr.
No,
McKinnon?
I was just going to suggest the wording we just arrived at.
Okay, great. So could I just have just kind of a show of hands? Yes, you agree to that change to really around request? Yeah. Thank you. Mr. McKinnon, now you have a second amendment, which is to remove and that the committee report this request to the House et que le comité fasse rapport à cette demande à la Chambre. That amendment is on the table. Would anyone like to yes, Mr. Danko.
Yeah, just on this is to be consistent, I think, with the various other committees that we're want to keep committee work in committee and House work in the House, and we have a fairly substantial full House calendar that we want to make sure that we don't inadvertently bring committee business to the House. So I think this is consistent with the other committees. It's also speaks to the efficiency of government. I think that we want to, keep the committee discussions at the committee level. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I have Mr. Stevenson.
I'll let Mr. Redekop go first.
Mr. Redekop, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll be brief. The only thing that I would suggest to the committee is that in this particular case, the Auditor General has actually indicated that she prioritizes her work based on where the requests are coming from. And when they come from committee, they have a certain amount of weight. And when they come from the House, they have more weight. And so I think in this case, it actually has a practical application in terms of getting the attention of the Auditor General and priorities that she might set. So that's all. I just want to make that point.
Thank you. Mr. Osborne, I think you were first, and then Mr. McKinnon, but at least according to the clerk. So, but you two are welcome to swap up if you like.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. To the last point made, I agree that committee work stays at committee. This doesn't stop individuals from asking questions in the House or to make put forward a motion in the House. let's not be presumptuous on what the response of the Auditor General will be. I think we can remove this if this doesn't, if we don't get a response that is favorable to the committee from the Auditor General, then the House can proceed to, a motion in the House to do the same as this. But committee work should stay at the committee.
Thank you. Mr. McKinnon.
I was just going to say that I don't think the Auditor General needs something to catch your attention on this, and I would agree with my colleagues.
Thank you. Mr. Stevenson.
I would just emphasize that in our past, the Auditor General has stated to us that her priorities are always weighted by the House versus what the committees are, and the Public Accounts Committee is not exactly like some of the other committees, so I would say that it's still important for us to keep that in there, to have the value to emphasize our importance to the Auditor General.
Thank you very much. I will call the roll call in on this amendment, and it is to remove, and that the committee report this request to the House et que le comité fasse rapport à cette demande à la
And that the
Chambre.
committee report this request to the House.
And no, if you'd like to maintain the motion as it is. Would you call the roll call, please, Clerk?
Mr. McKinnon? Mr. Osborne?
Yes.
Ms. Yip?
Yes.
Mr. Danko?
Yay.
Monsieur Dantel?
No.
Mr. Kirk?
Nope.
Mr. Stevenson?
Nope.
Monsieur Lemire?
Contre.
And you have the casting vote.
So it's 4-4. I will cast the vote to maintain the motion as it is, and I vote no. We now return to the motion as amended. Any discussion or debate on the motion? Clerk, could you call the roll call on the motion as amended, please?
Mr. McKinnon? No. Mr. Osborne?
No.
Ms. Yip?
No.
Mr. Danko?
No.
Monsieur Dantel?
Oui.
Mr. Kirk?
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson?
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire?
En faveur.
4-4 casting vote.
4-4. I will vote in favor of the motion, so it is passed. And I will now return to the round of questioning. We're just at the end of the second round. Mr. Osborne, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Let me gather my thoughts for a moment. I'd like to ask, and I guess this is really for IRCC, in a small province like Newfoundland and Labrador, the Auditor General has pointed out that they were disproportionately impacted by the decision of IRCC. Can you speak to what has been done to rectify that? I know I was a member of the provincial legislature actually when this had transpired. Can you speak to what has been done to rectify the difference where Newfoundland and Labrador should have seen an increase, but instead had seen a decrease?
I'll just make a couple quick points and then turn to colleagues to kind of detail it. But starting in January 2025, changes were made to the provincial allocation, so that wasn't in time to be picked up by the OAG's report, but that proactive adjustment process started already. This spring, we are engaged with provinces to really understand how we can tweak the allocation model and customize to help address the concern you're expressing. We've also committed to giving them better data and better information so they themselves can plan within their jurisdiction. So very respectful of the shared their responsibility for education, and so giving them data. And then finally, we've committed to another round of tweaking this fall. And so, Alexis, I don't know if you want to kind of detail some of that for the members.
Yes, I'm happy to provide additional details. So, I mean, I think we completely understand and agree that attraction in smaller centers is a challenge, and that the changes certainly have had impacts across the countries and in smaller jurisdictions. We have embarked on a fairly detailed and robust engagement plan with provinces and territories to really better understand what is causing approvals versus refusal rates. And we have also adjusted the allocation formula to take into account the approval rates of certain jurisdictions. So in practice, that means that we will kind of give more allocations to those where we are seeing higher refusals so that they can add more students to that and so they don't get kind of penalized. But in general, these are conversations that are happening through multiple layers, starting from the minister, going down to working groups, to really unpack that, share information, generate more complementarity between the programming, and really understand what is at the root of this so that DLIs and recruitment efforts can focus on the students that are going to be successful.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. How do both agencies, I would think, balance the reduction in new arrivals with the need to attract and retain skilled workers, especially in areas where we have skilled labor shortages, medical health professionals, for example?
Again, I'll make a brief start and then turn to Alexis. But, you know, there were two prongs to the strategy that was initiated in 2023. It was both to get the numbers and the integrity under control, but also increase the quality. And so in terms of the definition of that and kind of working with jurisdictions to make sure that, you know, world-class students that really make a difference in terms of the Canadian educational landscape are there. And so, Alexis, do you want to kind of come in a bit on the quality aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the volumes, that is, and just the composition, we do see that there is a shift. So just for example, the proportion of university-bound students is back to pre-pandemic volumes of about 40%. So it's shifted away from colleges and back into that kind of university space. And we also see that top research universities are leading the new study permit recipients and are welcoming more students in STEM. So, for example, it's up 3.6% from 2024 to 2025. And there are fewer kind of in those oversubscribed business programs. So we are seeing some adjustments already and some changes in those behaviors and those outcomes. And I would just also note doctoral students applying to study in Canada and their family members now also benefit from 14-day processing. So we've really tried to speed that up for that particular cohort, and IRCC is meeting that commitment.
Thank you. I will commend the Auditor General for bringing some of the concerns to light. I'll commend IRCC and Canadian Border Services as well for how you've reacted to those recommendations. I want to ask both agencies if you can expand on some of the improvements that have been put in place as a result of the findings of the Auditor General, including the fact that last year you reviewed 100% of the potential fraud cases. What brought you to be able to do that? For example, what measures were put in place? What other improvements were put in place as a result of the recommendations?
Maybe I'll start, Mr. Chair. So it was unfortunately the Auditor General who shone a spotlight on these discrepancy letters, the 153,000. And so it wasn't, in fairness, till the OAG arrived that we started looking at those in detail. I would say that the letter process was new. And so there was a sense, I think, within the IRCC that the number would come down naturally as people got used to the process, and there would be filler mistakes. And, you know, after several years, it would be a good time to kind of pounce and start looking in kind of detail. And so I think what I would describe, Mr. Chair, was a process of weeding down that list. But we're not done. And so there is work ahead of us in terms of confirming whether the people without status have effectively left the country or not. And so I don't want to leave this committee with the impression that the work is done. We have narrowed the list down to people who don't have valid status in Canada, but we have yet to fully confirm that they have actually left the country or not. And then finally, the hard work, people who ought to have left the country who haven't, that's going to be tough work. And that work is ahead of us, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That is your time, Mr. Osborne. Beginning our third round, I'm going to go to Mr. Stevenson, I believe, to kick us off for. Yes.
Thank you.
5 minutes.
I have several questions, but most of them have been partially answered, so I'll try and be a little succinct on these. First one will be to the Auditor General. In your audit, when you found those fraudulent cases, did you have any link? Did you see any pattern within those cases that linked them to specific institutions?
So I think you're talking about the 800 cases. Yes, so those were identified by Immigration Department. What we did notice as a pattern from them is a little over 700 had claimed that they had attended an educational institution that just did not exist.
Was it all the same one, or was it multiple different names that were?
I'm going to have to ask if someone has that answer just across the table from me. I don't think we
Not
have
specific.
that answer, but I think it just shows the majority of them had that as a fraudulent documentation, and that would have been an alert, something that the Immigration Department should have
So,
seen.
and again, with those numbers, was there any indication of an agency or an individual that was promoting this to say, hey, come to Canada through this student area, and this is your path, and so there's no real link between the individual cases?
So we didn't go that far into those each individual cases. The patterns we did notice, as I said, was that over 700 of them had this one fraudulent letter or claim of an institution. About 68% of those 800 were approved through the Student Direct stream. So we were again connecting to a bucket that came through on a light touch, faster process, and so this just raises other flags around having a control is good, but the control is only as effective as the enforcement and the follow through.
I'll go to Mr. Gallen or Ms. Graham going through that. Just on they talked about the light touch. Is that part of your, as you said, plan of action that's to be completed in 26? Is the light touch being addressed as to maybe that's not a good process going forward?
I think there's two parts. The program itself, which was a lighter touch, was discontinued, so that's happened. Now we have the students who were ingested during that lighter touch period who are still in Canada and have transferred, and that's where we've taken a commitment in 100% of the cases to take into account that they receive less scrutiny. And so if they're renewing their student visa, extra scrutiny, and so I think it's managing the population that came in while the program was live.
So just going on an extension of that, it seems to me that we had discussed earlier that there was a doubling of the number of people in your department. So it's, by the sounds of things, your plan of action is not that you needed more staff to do this, because now you're doing the 100% follow-ups on those, but you didn't before. So that was just, was that a choice by the department, or was that indicated before? It was save some money, and this is how they plan on doing it?
I think in a first instance, because this was a new process, this idea of letters was a new process, I think now that, let me say this bluntly, the number of suspected fraud cases should drive the allocation of resources rather than a fixed budget that management decided. And so, the commitment we're trying to take is that we do have sufficient resources, although 14,000 is a little bit generous. We're not quite that large, but we have sufficient resources. We ought to reallocate resources to deal with the risk.
So can you just tell me, as a percentage, I don't know if you have numbers, you probably don't have the numbers, but as a percentage even, or you can get back to us later, in your department and in your process, how many people are actually focused on just investigating the claims versus administration of the rest of your program?
So I've asked the same question. Part of the challenge is we have visa officers who are both facilitators and compliance officers. They get a visa application, and it depends on the veracity of the claim. That wasn't a very satisfying answer to me, but that's where I am right now. We have very few full-time compliance officers. All of our officers, when they look at a visa, are thinking compliance and service, and it's really the nature of the application and the facts of the file that dictate whether they're facilitative or not.
When you get to the bottom of those and you find somebody that should not be involved or should fail the system and get kicked out, how are you doing like a data dump to the other departments to say, hey, here's all the individuals now? Is that part of your action plan?
So part of the action plan is to dedicated compliance teams. So that would be kind of the second tier. So the visa officer, we got a problem. In a program, we have a problem. We are striking dedicated compliance teams. So I'll have a better answer in terms of how many people work full-time on compliance going forward. But we want to take the first cut before it goes over the wall to the CBSA, because again, sometimes somebody has merely failed to inform us of changing educational institutions. That's not okay. We have to enforce it. But I think it's premature to kind of initiate a forced removal until we ascertain that's the circumstance.
That is your time, Mr. Stevenson. Suivant, next, Ms. Yip, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for staying longer. This is for Ms. Hogan. I believe Mr. Osborne had touched on his province. In the report, it says the reduction in new study permits disproportionately affected smaller provinces. Why is that?
I think there was a compounding effect there. The first allocation model assumed an approval rate of all applications received at about 60% when each province has a very different pattern. And as was already mentioned by the Deputy Minister, that got adjusted as they fixed the allocation model. So I think the drop in actual applications, then the application of an approval rate that was not an accurate one for the province made a bit of a compounding effect on a province. And that's why in April of 2024, I believe there was a top-up done. But that top-up still hasn't compensated for the disproportionate impact.
Mr. Gallivan, did you want to further comment on that, or Ms. Graham?
Thank you for the question. And I think, it is clear that the change and the transition with CAPS and the new requirements did have an effect. And so as part of the action plan, you will see that we do plan on undertaking multiple touch points with provinces and territories in support of maximizing the utilization of those allocations. So we have a series of kind of meetings that will be taking place in terms of sharing data, understanding what is the reason behind refusals, so those behaviors can change and recruitment patterns can change as well, hopefully transitioning to a more ample use of those allocations. And then we'll have a tracking, of course, throughout that to see if we are actually achieving that objective. And we'll course correct as necessary with them as essential partners in this particular objective.
Approximately 40% of cases were not closed because students did not respond to requests for more information. How can you compel students to respond in order to close the cases?
It's interesting because at committee just Monday, there was a bit of a conversation and then a sidebar between CBSA's president and myself, Mr. Chair, on this very question. And so to show where focus and prioritization is important, we were talking about an indicator in the border system. And so if that student who's not talking to us travels out of the country and back into the country, there should be an indicator to CBSA that says we're looking for TED. And so I think it's really designing a compliance framework around that. And, for IRCC, there's been a lot of focus on the front end, a lot of focus on helping refugees, on helping facilitate, but we need that same energy to be applied, I think, to the back end. And so an example of how to find a student is put an indicator in the border system, and if that person ever crosses the border back and forth, then we're able to force a conversation. And that's just one example of how we need to think through a compliance framework that kind of puts some teeth into the process.
Yes, I did wonder. I often find it hard to track my own kids. So, how else is CBSA collaborating with IRCC?
I mean, in this particular, and thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In this particular instance, we're deeply implicated in the MRAP itself, not in the Management Response Action Plan, and so we will be working with our colleagues at IRCC in fulfilling the commitments in that action plan. But I'd say we work together on a daily basis in terms of it's as I alluded to earlier, there's I think of it as a continuum of activities when you think about somebody coming into the country. When somebody gets a visa, it starts with the IRCC, but then they send some of the visa applicants to us to the security screening. Then we send the recommendation back. When somebody arrives, we do the processing at the border. They're doing the integrity checks for the student program in country. So it's you know, not all of our systems are automated. Not all of our things are perfectly aligned from a communication point of view, but I think the staff and the people are constantly working together on a daily basis. Going back to the question of our security screening program, for example, we have an ADM meeting, or an ADM committee that governs that program. It's all three agencies that are involved, and so we collaborate every day on these issues.
Yeah, this is not the time to work in silos. I had a question about the student direct stream, and that IRCC was slower to respond with the integrity concerns. What is being done to rectify that for the student direct stream?
So, Mr. Chair, back to earlier testimony. So that program was discontinued, and so that's positive going forward, but we are left with the legacy, I think, of a cohort that we're subject to less rigor than we would normally apply. And, you know, back to the risks of fraud and what we're worried about, in some cases the risk was asylum claims. Well, they might have claimed the asylum already, but it's working through that population as they seek new visas or seek renewals to make sure extra rigor is applied, because it wasn't applied in the first instance, and then managing it as a population again around something like the departure date. And, you know, when your visa expires, you really ought to leave the country. And so we'll lead with education and compassion, and then kind of turn up the heat to make sure that people follow the rules.
Thank you. That is your time, Monsieur. Suivant encore une fois, c'est Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. A quick question for written documents, and then after that, I'll table the motion once again that you already saw. Mr. Gallivan, you spoke earlier about a new IT program launched for the end of the term of the permits. Could you give us an estimate of the program costs and the actual costs incurred so far? It would be interesting to see, and I'd like to have an overall estimate and expenditures so far, breaking down by phase for the modernization of the platform, the digital platform. And if you could be good enough to send it to the committee in writing, this is something of particular interest to me, the computer or IT services contracts and the mechanisms of those contracts. Thank you for agreeing to that, and I can see you nodding. And just for the record, which doesn't record nodding, could you please mention? Yes, I understand the two-part question, and I will send it in writing for better information, and I undertake to act as soon as we get the information. Thank you, Chair. I have another motion connected with IT programs. There was a debate in the House, and during this debate, the Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Lamoureux, raised the fact that parliamentary committees were the right place to be able to shed light on programs and reports connected with the government. So I take note of that and at its face value. So given the response of the government and the additional information providing the report, one delivery benefits delivery modernization program published by the Standing Committee on Public Accounts and the payment delays for 60,000 seniors, the committee undertake a follow-up study that the committee requested the Department of Employment and Families, the Department of Government Transformation, Public Works and Procurement, the Privy Council and Prime Minister's Office provide the clerk of the committee with the 30 days of the adoption of this motion, with all reports, correspondence, emails, and documents relating to the management of the modernization of benefit payments since January 1, 2017, and that the departments and the Prime Minister's Office responsible for producing the documents apply redactions in accordance with the legal obligations set out in the Privacy Act and the Access to Information Act, and that the committee hold the first meeting on this study 1 week after receiving the documents, that senior officials from Employment and Social Development Canada, Services and Procurement Canada, Shared Services Canada, and the Treasury Board, that Cliff Groen, former Associate Deputy Minister and Business Lead Benefits Delivery Modernization, and John Ostrander, former Technical Lead Benefits Delivery Modernization, be summoned. I think there are going to be some proposed amendments, Chair, but that is the motion as presented. I think you're correct.
This is going to be very quick because we're running up against the clock. I'm going to suspend for 2 minutes. I'm going to take the temperature of the room very, very quickly, and then we'll come back to Monsieur Lemire, and then we can see what amendments we have. So just a 2-minute suspension, please. I'll just bring us back into order very quickly. I'm going to thank our witnesses for their testimony and participation in relation to the report on international student program reform of the 2026 spring report to the Auditor General of Canada. Thank you for coming in. I thank you. I'll excuse you now. I'm going to suspend again for 5 minutes and come right back. bring this meeting. I'll take things relatively slow-ish. I know there'll be some amendments here. So looking for a speaker, I suspect on the government side, to propose some amendments. So I'm sure the government does not want this to collapse on a vote right away. So could I see someone's hand to speak to the block motion? Gene, why don't you hold the floor until your amendments come? I know there's a lot here, and I called you back unexpectedly. So,
Yeah.
Somebody speak to them.
Are you ready?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't mind having another 60 seconds with Mr.
Okay.
Lemire to see if we can resolve this before we put amendments through.
as in privately offline?
Yeah.
All right. Est-ce que ça va, Monsieur Lemire? 60 secondes?
Oui, oui.
Okay. I'll suspend for another minute. To take their seats. I know the discussions in the hallway can be beneficial, but I also know that sometimes you got to hash these things out in public at the committee. I will, as the sponsor, Michel Lemire, as-tu des commentaires ou veux-tu que j'aille immédiatement un membre du gouvernement?
As sponsor, Ms. Lemire, do you have any comments to make before we hear from the government side? Well, first of all, I feel as though I'm kind of in a stalemate at the moment, in the sense that I think there's been a good faith exchange that's being made, but I still have a hard time seeing what's being asked for when they talk about 1 million documents based on confidence, of course. Am I questioning? There are some discussions about reducing some of the aspects of correspondence and email, which I consider essential to be able to see to what degree there's a gaining of awareness, and particularly actions where there are gaps and possible solutions with an explosion of costs when the estimates turned out to be completely unrealistic, and we go back to the chronology, we went from 0.7 to 2.4 roughly, to 3.5 to 4.4 by memory, to 6.6, I think. So there are 4 or 5 times when there have been cost increases, which are no small thing. And I think this is a matter of public interest. What I'm trying to understand is also how the contracts developed, how contracts like Deloitte, Accenture, and IBM were able to, what mandate they had. We have information that we received that we have to look at in greater depth, but it was also those who brought in the solutions. If you make errors, you're paid to correct them, and those costs are quite exorbitant for the taxpayers that are required to be involved, and the responsibility in the context of the Prime Minister, who was advised by Ms. Charette, the clerk of the Privy Council, in May 2022. Are there other examples where the Prime Minister was able to become aware of how things were getting off track and what actions may have been taken? Publicly, we didn't see any of those. So these are important issues which, at present, in light of the negotiations, there is nothing that would lead me to say that there's nothing that would lead me to make a friendly amendment that I would be able to include, except for perhaps saying that it's not just the management of the modernization program, but it's really the issue of the cost overruns and new costs and how they've been assessed in the circumstances. Of course, I'm open if more clarification is given regarding the aspects of this motion, but I think that we need to get an understanding of the errors that have been made in order to avoid repeating them over again, and it goes beyond the knowledge of what actually happened.
Osborne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank Mr. Lemire as well for the discussions we've had. We may still be at a stalemate. I'm hoping we can find a way to resolve this. The challenge, Mr. Chair, is the amendment as it's written. It is absolutely 100% without argument impossible to fulfill that. You know, the time frame under ATIP rules, the 30 days, we're talking literally millions of documents. And we're talking millions of dollars to produce those documents. So we're trying to work with Mr. Lemire to find a way of getting a realistic ask that will provide him with the information that he's looking for. I think if the committee were to adopt this motion as it is, we are putting forward something we know is going to fail, which is not a realistic expectation of this committee. So, you know, I don't know if we can continue to work with Mr. Lemire. You know, if we can't resolve something, come back Monday and deal with this motion. But maybe if we can continue to work with Mr. Lemire so that in good faith we try to get him the information he's looking for, but also in good conscience knowing that, you know, if this motion passed on the floor, it cannot be fulfilled. And then it looks like, you know, the motion wasn't fulfilled. But we all know in good conscience we cannot produce millions of documents in 30 days.
Yes, pardon me. Yes, Mr. Biddle.
Well, just if there's no one on the list, I'm happy to start talking. This wasn't on my bingo card today, but welcome to the committee. It's unsurprising what we hear today and what I see, like this motion that's before us, that the Bloc comes down and pretends to care about the plight of seniors. And perhaps there's some genuine concern behind this. But instead of doing something meaningful, instead of doing something that will actually help those seniors, what we're seeing is a motion that the Bloc is looking for millions of documents. And they can pretend, oh, there's I'll find that needle in the haystack. Don't you worry. It's nonsense. It's pure nonsense what we're seeing here today. The theory behind this, and my colleague Mr. Osborne talks about it, that it's impossible to be able to comply with this. Well, that's what the Bloc is counting on. Not to help seniors, but to attempt to bring a contempt motion down the road. That's what they want. They want the dog and pony show of doing that rather than actually finding what's wrong. And I expect a little better from Monsieur Lemire, but here we are with this in front of us. And what do we expect at the end of the day? 30 days after this, Mr. Lemire rises in the House and says, Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to comply. Now, I'm sure Mr. Lemire would be happy to make translators and interpreters suffer over millions of documents so he can find that needle in the haystack, that smoking gun. He knows that's not the case. He knows what he's asking is absolutely preposterous. But yet he still carries on. He says that everyone's negotiating in good faith, but at the same time, there's no genuine good faith in this document in front of us. All we see is an attempt to drag this out. Millions of documents. I'm genuinely interested in hearing from the member how he's going to go through that. Him and his assistant who's sitting behind him are just going to go through documents, document after document, and they're going to find that. And expect that the government, I know the government of Canada is big, it's a G7 country, but millions of documents at the end of the day is a lot to ask of any department. And what are we going to see? We're not going to see benefit. Are we going to see the benefit to seniors? No. If the government drops the truckload of boxes off at his office and says, here you go, and complies with it, which we said we can't, but this is what he's asking for. Back up that 18-wheeler by my office, dump off these documents. I'm going to go through them document by document. It's going to take him years to go through it. If in this hypothetical situation that he's created, that he genuinely thinks, if he's genuine in this, which I don't know that he is, what we're seeing is preposterous. So he gets this 18-wheeler at his office. He's going through it page by page. How many years are we thinking of him to get through this? Will be multiple elections down the road before Monsieur Lemire. I found it. I found the smoking gun in this needle in the haystack. I'm hoping that he can be realistic. I'm hoping the members of the committee could be realistic in terms of what they're looking at. Because I haven't been privy to these discussions. There's a genuine concern at the middle of this. But the solution that's been brought forward isn't meeting that. Is he going to get an army of seniors in his riding to help him shovel through those documents? Go page by page, make sure they're properly translated, and ensure that he has that. This is just unbelievable. Well, it's not unbelievable. That's a stretch. It's fully believable, having been here long enough to see what we're going through. Where's the genuine desire to help those seniors? And I was sitting here while colleagues were discussing it, and I heard some genuine interest to get to the bottom of this. But I don't know what those solutions are. I don't want to say them. They were said in confidence between the parties. But I think the opposition knows. They have the votes this week. and they're going to see what they can get that vote, be able to go to the speaker, be able to rise on a point of privilege and say the government hasn't done the impossible thing that I asked them to do. Where's my 18-wheeler full of documents? I demand that 18-wheeler full of documents. That will help Quebec seniors. I doubt that. I look to my colleagues. I don't want to hog it. I'm just a temporary member of this committee briefly. Mr. Chair, is there anyone else on the list? Well, then I will cede my time, and I hope we have some productive discussion going forward in the brief time that I'm here. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, you caught me. I'm out of practice. I normally don't reveal the speaking list, but you caught me in a moment of weakness. Monsieur Lemire, s'il vous plaît. Puis après ça, j'ai Mr. Detel et après ça, Mr. McKinnon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. So it's pretty interesting to see that the only Liberal member who did not take part to these negotiations is the one that is grandstanding today and giving me intentions that I don't have. All Quebecers, and particularly seniors, are wondering what the Liberals are hiding in the circumstances. You know, Mr. Chair, there are procedures. A motion has been tabled. We don't know how many documents will be requested. It could be 1 million documents, but obviously I'm acting in good faith. Discussions have been had. I have been discussing with Liberal MPs over the past few days, but I can't amend my own motion. It had to come from the government. No tangible solutions were put forth. No one has suggested how to amend this motion so that it become realistic. And so are we talking about correspondence or emails? Maybe we can't obtain all those documents within the required timeline. Maybe we'll be able to get the other documents. We can hold committee meetings during which we'll be able to ask questions to people who have certain responsibilities and who spent billions of dollars of taxpayer money. That's what we're talking about today. My colleagues are saying it'll be 1 million documents because it includes correspondence and emails. Well, if we omit those documents, we double down on the fact that there will still be 1 million documents to sift through. So who is acting in bad faith? In my opinion, I don't think that it's always possible to negotiate with the government in good faith. Mr. Deltel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The fact that our colleague is here this evening is a demonstration of the fact that this is a very sensitive subject for the government. It's an honor to have this veteran parliamentarian. He knows all about parliamentary strategy, specifically in committees, where you know that people can speak for hours, for years, without actually saying anything. We've seen it. In the last few weeks at the Ethics Committee, the Minister of Finance was asked to testify on Alto. It was absolutely legitimate, and that took 20 hours of filibustering. In other words, people spoke about absolutely everything and anything. And in the end, what happened? Common sense prevailed. And in the end, the minister will testify. I think Mr. Lemire was clear here. It's not as though we're each going to have an 18-wheeler with all this, showing up at our writing office. A member is being a bit excessive in this. It's our constitutional duty. Every single one of the constituents in our riding asked us a year ago to call this government to account. And that's precisely why we have parliamentary committees. That's precisely why we have motions that focus on getting to the root of issues. And this means hundreds of millions of pages of documents. Listen, that's our duty. It's not an issue of weight. It's a question of responsibility. The issue of seniors is an issue. Management of public funds is an issue. We are dealing with a government that recently signed an $80 billion deficit into the budget. This is all this money that we do not have, that we are handing over the bill for to our children. And we know the situation of seniors. The needs of seniors will mean that every government at every level will have to act. And that's precisely what we want to do with Mr. Lemire's motion that we support to get to the bottom of this. Mr. Chair, let's put to the side these theatrics. I hope this motion can pass. Thank you very much.
It's okay. I'd like to cede my time to Mr. Osborne.
Bon, je vais céder mon temps.
I can come back to, it doesn't quite...
Je peux vous y revenir, mais j'ai une liste d'établis. Alors, nous serons là bientôt.
I mean, I can remove you, put you back.
Je peux vous remettre au bas de la liste si vous voulez. Tout d'abord,
He's not hearing the translation.
Mr. Lemire mentioned, we want to toe the line and we want to keep costs in order and so forth. And we don't want to waste taxpayer money. And that's exactly the point of what we're trying to negotiate with Mr. Lemire, is to keep the number of documents to a manageable level and a time frame that is a reasonable, responsible level, point. In that respect, I'd like to submit an amendment. I'd like to, in the second paragraph of this motion in the English, I'd like to change the word management, where it says relating to the management of the modernization of benefit payments. I'd like to change that to be, instead of management, to say estimates and costs. And that would be my amendment at this point.
All right, so I have an amendment on the floor to change the word management in paragraph 2 to estimates and costs. En français, ça serait... just un second. C'est vrai, we have translation services. Pardon, Monsieur Lemire. Alors, on enlève... c'est où? Gestion serait...
So we're removing management for estimates and costs.
Estimé et coût. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Detel. So, we are now debating the amendment to the motions. Any speakers? Oui, Monsieur Lemire.
Question de précision.
Just for some specific here, estimates and costs. Does that involve every? Well, we were talking about an estimate of 1.7. Obviously, the costs have risen to be at 2.4. Then there was a new request to 3.5. And now 4.4 billion. And the Auditor General issued a report on this. And now we have a new estimate, a new cost estimate. Does it include each one of these steps? Because the purpose here is to really be able to ask for the increase in costs in management since 2017. The reason why we're asking for this is to know what happened at every stage. If there's been an ask for an increase, quintupling the price, that means to me, to my mind, there's an inability to deliver the program. That's how I'd put it.
Anyone want to reply to Monsieur Lemire? Moi, je ne peux pas, mais yes, Mr. Osborne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I mean, hoping to lower the temperature in the room, because at the end of the day, we want to deal with this motion and the amendments. Just speaking to this, this is a good faith amendment. I would suggest to Mr. Lemire and to all members of the committee. We are trying to get you the information that you're looking for, but we're trying to do it in a way that we can actually get it for you, that you're not also buried in millions of documents. So I would urge all members of the committee to vote for this amendment. It's not meant to distract from what you're trying to accomplish, but to help achieve what you're trying to accomplish.
We'd like to go, Mr. Firth. I think it was kind of a tie, but I think Mr. McKinnon, unless you want to hear from Mr. Lemire first, if it's up to you.
I just wanted
Over
to
you.
emphasize.
Yeah, you've got the floor. Pierre Michel Lemire après.
I just want to emphasize that the point here is to keep this to be a manageable request, a doable thing. Mr. Lemire mentioned the concern about wasting of taxpayer money. If we issue a request for documents and a massive data dump, it could cost millions of dollars. It could take weeks and weeks and weeks. I want to keep this reasonable and manageable, and this is a good faith, as Mr. Osborne mentioned, it's a good faith attempt to do that. So,
oui, Monsieur Lemire.
Je reconnais que c'est proposé de bonne foi.
I recognize it's in good faith, but the questions were also in good faith. Did it include every one of these stages with some rationale as to why there's a new estimate request, so many of them, and why the estimates, the estimated costs, were not enough? Do we have that information for every step in the increase in costs? That's the purpose of the question. I also think I could say that it's in good faith.
So I'll look for yes, Ms. Yip.
Well, I think that by adding estimate and costs in place of management, you're narrowing the scope so that it can be able to answer your inquiries better and faster, because it's too broad. And I think one of your goals is really about getting an answer. And so if it's more narrow in scope, that will help.
Oui, Monsieur Lemire.
Again, I'll ask my question.
Là, c'est une
What we're referring to here is something that I proposed. I used the terms cost overruns and new amounts. And now there's a new scope. Listen, I'm comfortable. I'm simply asking whether this would include each of the stages for which we've asked for explanations as to the cost increases and why these amounts were not sufficient enough when we went from 1.7 to 2.5, 2.4, and then 3.3, and then 3.5, or to 4.4, and then to 6.6. At every step, asking for estimates and costs by using that language, do we have what was provided or estimated? We have that information when it's at 6.6, sure. But we have the stepwise progression over time. That's the purpose of my question, and it was asked in good faith. I hope we can arrive at a consensus on this. Thank you.
you know, to drill down into what exactly estimates and costs entails is it's very technical, and I don't think we want to get into the level of defining legal terms and so forth. I just think it's much more specific than management. Management, broadly speaking, is a very general thing, and it does. You know, I think if we can focus this on estimates and costs, and if you know, as we go forward, if it's not the kind of information Mr. Lemire really wants, we can modify later on. But I think for now, to keep this request reasonable, to keep it manageable and doable, because we certainly want to get the information before this committee that the committee needs. I think it's an appropriate change at this time.
Allez-y, Mr. Osborne, you have the floor. And Ms. Chip, I had you on it, but we've kind of moved to debate. Do you want a chance as well? If you do, just put your hand up, but I'll go to Mr. Osborne since he's ready.
Yeah, if Mr. Lemire has something to add, go ahead. If, yeah.
Je suis pas fermé à la formule.
I'm not opposed to the formula here that's being, the wording that's used here. I mean, management of costs and estimates, I would have referred to cost overruns. I'm not opposed to the wording. I just like it to be inclusive so that it includes the various stages here where there have been new estimates and new costs. Is that information over time available? Here we're talking about as of January 1st, 2017. I would expect that the next stage, once we've accepted that, would be to call into question that date. So I'm anticipating that. to see whether we can get that information for each of these steps in the process.
I think the attempt of officials and the attempt of members on this side is to get you the information. At the end of the day, you may say that it wasn't enough information. I don't know, but we are attempting to try and so. I think with this wording, that attempt is there. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Ms. Shipp, I had you on before, but we kind of, I think I turned my back. I didn't know if you have something to say.
My hand wasn't.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Oh, she had her hand up.
Oh,
Christina had
pardon
it.
me. Hello, Ms. Tessa Dirksen. So,
Yeah.
Thank
you
you.
are.
Sorry, I thought my name was on the list. I apologize for coming in so late, and I appreciate everyone's patience while I had colleagues fill in for me. I was just up in the House delivering a speech on MP Abdouteif's motion for the Living Donor Award. And I have to say, Mr. Chair, coming out of that speech, when we were talking about people who are facing life and death circumstances needing organs donated, it's kind of put into perspective for me what we're talking about around this committee table. No doubt that what my colleagues present is extremely important, and we've said that. And I agree with my colleagues on all of their points. I think my colleague, Monsieur Lemieux's efforts are very noble, and I said this in the last meeting as well, that I acknowledge, we all acknowledge that where there is improvement or room for improvement for government to acknowledge and improve its services, that's what this committee is here for, right? That's what we're here for, in a nonpartisan way to make taxpayer dollars go further and to have the most impact. But there's a balance there as well. And I have to admit that when I read the motion, I was a little bit puzzled by my honourable colleague's presumption that this was in any way realistic to produce in a reasonable amount of time. From what I understand, we could potentially be looking at millions of documents. I'm not sure if my colleague even has a proposal as to who would go through all those documents. I presume given that we are a bilingual society, that all of those would need to be translated and translated well to ensure that understanding of both Francophone and Anglophone readers was honored. That's going to take, I don't even know how much time, how much expense, how much expertise of translators and interpreters. It would be considerable. And it's particularly ironic that we're looking at a motion that is meant to honor the integrity of taxpayer dollars being spent in government services. And at the same time, the scope of this motion would cost, I can presume, a tremendous amount of taxpayer dollars. Given the amount of time it would take to produce so many documents, translate so many documents, review, redact, I don't believe the cost is going to weigh out in the result. So I would support my colleagues in the points they've made that I've heard so far, walking into the meeting at this point. And given that the motion's asking for the production of all reports, correspondence, emails, documents, over I believe, a 9-year window, its 9 or 8 year window is tremendous. So especially given that the program involves these multiple federal departments as well. Employment and Social Development Canada, I believe, would be the lead on that. Treasury Board Secretariat, Shared Services Canada, Public Services Procurement Canada. And particularly, the motion specifically names the PMO as a department from which governments are to be produced. I'm not sure if I've ever heard of a motion that contemplates such a huge scope of material. So I would like to take all these elements in turn. I know I just walked in and I'm kind of hoarding a bunch of time, but if the committee will indulge me, I do want to address the breadth of this. So if we're talking about January 1st, 2017 to the present, so that's the full life of the program from what I understand. And when it was launched by ESDC in 2017, I understand that the estimated cost was $1.7 billion. And that number's been revised twice. I understand it will probably change again. And over those 8 years, this program has generated, as I said, an enormous volume of internal government correspondence and technical reports, procurement documents, government reviews, risk assessments, and ministerial briefings. My colleague's request for production order for, quote, all, unquote, of that material, it's not targeted. It's not a targeted audit inquiry in any sense. It's really more of a dragnet used to catch all and everything. It possibly could in a very haphazard manner that basically eviscerates and eludes all of the practices of transparency and accountability and privacy that we all value as parliamentarians and as Canadians. I understand that there are circumstances in which a dragnet of this nature is appropriate. If this committee had evidence of specific wrongdoing, for example, if we had reason to believe that documents were being concealed, or that the Auditor General's access had been impeded, or that testimony given before this committee had been deliberately misleading, then I suppose, yes, a broad production order might be justified. But the Auditor General's report doesn't allege any of those things, none of those serious findings. They're findings that the department has acknowledged and accepted. And when the Deputy Minister appeared before this committee, it would have been back in December 2023, before my time as an elected official, ESDC had stated that the government welcomes the report and its recommendations. There's no dispute over that. The departments agreed. The Treasury Board President agreed. That's all on the record. So if the departments have accepted the Auditor General's recommendations, what additional evidentiary purpose is served by demanding every email exchanged since 2017? The answer I would submit is that the purpose is not evidentiary. That's, I think, the logical conclusion that we would have to reach. The purpose appears to be more political. And while that may be a legitimate exercise in some committees, I don't believe that's what this committee is for. Second, the inclusion of the PMO. So this deserves particular attention, Mr. Chair. The PMO is not a department. It does not have operational responsibility for the BDM program. ESDC has that responsibility. Treasury Board Secretariat has oversight responsibility. Shared Services Canada has infrastructure responsibility. And Public Services and Procurement Canada has procurement responsibility. These are the organizations that the Auditor General audited. These are the organizations whose conduct this committee has the mandate to review. The PMO is included in this motion not because there's any evidence that the PMO was operationally involved in managing the BDM program, but because including it, I can only presume, raises the political stakes of the document production. And it signals that the motion's purpose, I think any logical person would arrive at this conclusion, that the motion's logical purpose, or its main purpose, is not audit follow-through, but rather an attempt to implicate the political executive in the management failings of a public service program. That is a legitimate political objective, perhaps in question period. I don't think it's the mandate of this committee. Now, I anticipate my colleagues will say, but what if there is PMO involvement? What if there are documents that show political direction to ESDC that contributed to the program's delays? And I would say that's a hypothesis. You got to show me evidence that supports the hypothesis. And I'll be among the first to call for targeted document production. But a hypothesis is not a reason to issue a blanket production order. Evidence-based scrutiny means starting with evidence, not going on a fishing expedition for it. Third, and this is a concern I want to spend some time on, Mr. Chair, is the question of what this committee intends to do with the documents if they are produced. The motion calls for documents to be produced with redactions applied in accordance with the Privacy Act and ATIP obligations. That's entirely appropriate, but it raises the question of what happens next. As I said, who reviews these documents? What's the committee's analytical framework for sorting through years, nearly a decade of internal correspondence from multiple federal departments? What witnesses will be called to contextualize what the documents show? What is the study plan? A production order without a study plan is not scrutiny, it's just document accumulation. And I've seen through modern political history how document accumulation can work, how the spectacle of a large production order becomes the point, and the actual analysis of the documents produced becomes secondary or forgotten entirely. I believe that's a risk that we take with this motion, and that's not what this committee should be doing. I do want to address the question of relevance to seniors and vulnerable Canadians, because I genuinely believe that my colleague cares very deeply for these people, for seniors and vulnerable Canadians. I think we all do. I think that's safe to say. My colleague has spoken at length numerous times around this committee table, as well as in the House, about his concern for seniors. And he speaks about 60,000 seniors that have been referenced in the motion before us. Perhaps, I've been droning on for a long time, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I'll allow someone else to speak.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Hesse-Dirksen. Mr. Couric, you are next on the list.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a couple points here where I understand that the government is using words like noble bill, good faith. They've proposed an amendment, but I don't think it fully reaches what my colleague is trying to put here. And I have concerns about using words like cost, time, unrealistic, predisposed outcomes that we actually don't know what are going to be. I do believe we are in public accounts, so I do believe. I just find that a little bit difficult. I think my colleague is simply asked to add dates to the government's amendment, which we could leave that for both of you to figure out, or dates to each step of every cost overrun, which I think he has a valid point there. But simply stating we're doing this in good faith doesn't get my colleague closer to his goal. And a statement that this is political, I find that hard to digest. We are public accounts, and there's been massive cost overruns on this, so I think it is an issue that public accounts can take a look at from an apolitical approach or a nonpartisan approach. I just hope the government can, and my colleague can find a better resolution, or amendment, I should say. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I thought just.
Can we call the vote on
this? Well, I can until the debate, mais c'est Monsieur Lemire, et peut-être Monsieur Lemire peut indiquer s'il.
And perhaps Mr. Lemire can indicate whether he supports the amendment. You have the amendment. It's the amendment on estimates and costs. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Estimates and costs, if you take that estimé and coût being the translation. Yes, I just add that now it's the second time that we've received lectures from someone from outside who's joining the committee to give us this view. Here, I would say that we're capable of addressing things. I am in favor. I am fine with including this amendment. But again, I would like to have information on every stage.
Then let's call a vote then. It's the easiest way. We get a roll call on this amendment. Estimates and costs to replace management. Estimé et coût qui remplace gestion.
Mr. McKinnon? Oui. Mr. Osborne?
Yes.
Ms. Hesse-Dirksen?
Yes,
Ms. Yip?
Oui.
Mr. Dantel? Oui. Mr. Couric?
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson?
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire?
Oui. En faveur.
All in favor.
It's passed. Yes, Mr. Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to put forward the second amendment, so.
Can I stop you?
Yeah.
I'll hear it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I, with respect to the chair, if you have something to say, I'm happy to.
I just have it. Just at a certain point, the resources begin to become unavailable. So why don't you share your amendment briefly, and then give the floor back to me.
Okay. Thank you.
I will go back to you if necessary.
Thank you. Second amendment is to strike out within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. Again, the volume of paper is not possible in 30 days. So this is, again, a good faith amendment. In the second paragraph, replace it with before the start of the fall session. I think that gives officials and government and everybody the ability to provide the volumes of documents that are being requested. Even if it were 30 days, the session is going to be closed before the start of the next session. Gives you the paperwork to go in guns a-blazing if that's what you need to do.
Yeah. Okay. I have to end things. We are out of resources. I'm going to say a couple points. I actually think that I actually think that's a very friendly and reasonable amendment to the motion, but that is for Mr. Lemire and other members to decide. Mr. Lemire, I'm going to end this meeting, but to focus minds the next couple of days is I need you to talk. I recognize the government will soon have a majority on committee, so I don't want to leave you stranded. This is an oversight committee, and I'll do everything I can to move this forward. But you all need to move forward as well, and I think what I've heard today in my experience are good faith amendments, and I'm going to urge you to keep on it the next couple of days. I'm not going to call the committee back tomorrow or Friday, but on Monday, be prepared to sit for a long time into next week, because I do recognize that you will soon have extraordinary powers, and those powers don't exist right now. And I'm not trying to jam you, but I do want to see Mr. Lemire's work come to fruition here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking for the same thing. I mean, I'm focused on trying to collaborate here. May I make one suggestion? If members want to debate this, we'll put it off. If members feel that this is a good faith amendment and want to vote on it, we can get this one out of the way today in the name of progress.
I wish I could, but around here, when you run out of resources, it's not just this room I have to worry about, it's translation, but also the virtual, that even though there's no one on it, I have to respect that. So this meeting is now, I'm actually going to say this one last time. I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm being unusually blunt because I actually think this can be resolved. I actually think you are trying to get to meet Mr. Lemire halfway. But I will signal that I will be scheduling extra time next week, because I don't want to interrupt. We've put off the First Nation study for so long now. I'm not going to move that one, but I will begin to move us into extra time if necessary. So I'll be speaking with your side and your side the next couple of days to see where we're at then. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Merci.